Good morning. It's May 7th, 9:52 a.m. But we're doing a little presentation about foreign business travel. What is deductible? Well, this is a very timely subject because we're getting into the summer months and we know that a lot of people are going to be wanting to travel. And so the question arises, can I do some travel, call it for business, and write it off? Well, we'll discuss that in today's presentation. A safe harbor statement. Please don't rely upon this information as definitive tax or financial advice. Always speak about the details of what you're planning to do with your financial advisor, accountant, or attorney before you make that decision. If I am your accountant, please speak with me and provide me with details based on the information that you see here, as that will help us to give you an accurate picture. So first, we're going to go over some key definitions, and there are a lot of definitions that you need to know. This is not a simplified topic or a simple topic. We try to simplify it as much as possible. However, it is a complex subject. Also, please note, this is exclusively related to travel outside the U.S. There are different rules that apply to travel inside of the U.S. We're going to talk about airfare expenses, we're going to talk about travel expenses, and then we're going to review what we learned. But let's go over some of these definitions because these are important. So the source for all these definitions, you can find all of them in IRS Pub 463. That is a publication that lays out the rules around travel. First definition we're going to go over is business purpose. This is the reason why traveling is needed. To check emails with a view is not a business purpose. So if the purpose of your trip is, hey, I want to sit by the pool and do some work, that is not a business purpose. Business purpose would be things like a trade show, a client meeting, a vendor meeting, a conference, something that actually requires you to travel. Remember, all expenses must be ordinary and necessary. Travel expenses are ordinary, but are they necessary? Do you have to do this? Is this actually going to benefit the business? So now, if you have one of these business purposes, then you have a business purpose. That's step number one. So let's go over some of the other rules that apply. Next slide. Let's talk about whether your trip is primarily for business. Again, we're talking about traveling outside the United States. Primarily for business means you spend most, but not all of your time on business. You will spend some time on personal activities. That's okay. It is allowed. However, in order for it to be primarily for business, you need to spend more than 50% of your time on business. Well, what does that mean? Well, we look at business days. Business days include transportation days. They include days your presence was required, days spent on business, and certain weekdays and holidays. What does it mean your presence was required? This goes back to the business purpose. This was any day your presence is required at a particular place for a specific business purpose. You can count even if you spend most of the day on non-business activities. So let's give an example. You are going to a trade show. The trade show on its last day, it wraps up at noon. You're also in a beautiful beach town, so you spend the rest of the day at the beach. Well, your presence was required at that trade show for the morning. Even if you spend more time at the beach on non-business activities, that's still a business day because your presence was required at that trade show. That's the physical reason you're there. Now, that's different from days spent on business. It is a business day. However, days spent on business, let's use the same situation. Your employer says, hey, you know what? Or your contractor says, hey, I need you to go ahead and work from 8 to 12, and you can take the rest of the day off. Well, if you spend the workday working primarily on business, that is a day spent on business. Or if you attempted to but couldn't because of unforeseen circumstances, that is a day spent on business. However, if you only spend half of the workday on business and your presence wasn't actually required there, then that day doesn't count as a business day. So let's give you a couple examples. I go to a trade show. I'm there Monday through Wednesday, but I'm hanging around Thursday through Saturday. So on Thursday, I whip out my laptop and I start working from about 8 to 12. And I was like, I'm going to go sightseeing the rest of the day. Well, I didn't spend the majority of that day working on business. That day doesn't count as a day spent on business. Why this is important? We'll get into this later, but remember, we're talking about primarily for business. We want to establish that our trip is primarily for business. Otherwise, we lose the ability to take a substantial number of deductions. So, days spent on business, there may be days where you don't have a presence being required at a certain site, but you may choose to work that day or the majority of that day. If you spend the workday working on business or attempted to, but couldn't because of unforeseen occurrences, then you can count that as a business day. So let's give you a couple examples there. I am at this trade show. The day after the trade show, I spend the entire 8 to 5 day working on business. Then I head out to the beach. That's a day spent on business because I spent the day at my hotel. Maybe I'm by the pool, I'm checking emails, I'm preparing returns, I'm doing things that I should do. Now, I would never prepare your returns by a pool. That's just a safety nightmare. But you get the idea. If I'm actually doing my work during the work day, that's what counts. Now, that's not like I'm on my BlackBerry or I'm on my phone, checking emails and responding to text. That's not the same thing. I'm doing that while I'm out, doing an ocean tour. Now, that's not a day spent on business. But if I'm spending the day actually doing the work that I normally do, then that's a day spent on business. But let's say I try to, but the Wi-Fi is out in the hotel. Well, I attempted to, but I can't because of unforeseen circumstances. Let's say I'm in Spain right now and the blackout hits. I can't because of unforeseen circumstances. It still counts as a day spent on business. Certain weekends and holidays. You can count weekends, holidays, and other standby days as business days if they fall between business days. Now this is important. Now let's think why. So let's say I decide that I'm going to go to a trade show, and my presence is required there at that trade show from Monday through Thursday. I take Friday off. Saturday and Sunday, I go sightseeing. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I go sightseeing. Monday, I do some work. Tuesday, I fly back. Well, the first days when I'm at the trade show, those are business days. However, because Friday I did not spend working, Saturday and Sunday become personal days. Let's take the same example, and I spend the trade show, then Friday I work. Monday I work. Well, Saturday and Sunday are now business days because they fall between business days. The same is true of a holiday. If I sandwich it in between work days, business days, then it becomes a work day. This right here is a huge hack that you can use in order to allow your expenses to count. When you're on a business trip with vacation mixed in, always work Friday and Monday. That way you can count Saturday and Sunday as business days. Why all this matters, we'll get into later, but we wanted to actually just show you what the rules say about business days. We're going to get into that later because most trips are going to be in that travel primarily for business, especially for self-employed individuals who are the ones who are going to actually benefit from this. Let's talk about travel entirely for business or considered entirely for business. There may be some situations in which your travel will be entirely for business. So if you travel outside the US and you spend the entire time on business activities, or if you meet at least one of the 4 exceptions, your trip is considered entirely for business. We'll talk about why this is important later, but it deals with your airfare expenses. So what are the exceptions? 1, no substantial control. This is very rare that you're going to be in a situation where you have no substantial control. Exception number 2, you're outside the US for 1 week or less. Don't count your travel day out. So I live in Atlanta. So let's say today I head to the Atlanta airport and I'm going to be gone for a week. Well, I don't count today as a travel day because I'm still inside the US. So if I'm there on Thursday and I return Wednesday, 1 week or less. So I still have to have a business purpose. Let's say I'm going to a trade show. Trade show starts on Friday. So Friday I'm at the trade show. Let's say it's a 1-day trade show. I'm there Friday. But again, because I went, it's less than a week, and it's a business purpose, and it is something that I have to do, now I can go ahead and take this exception and consider it entirely for business because it's such a short trip. Am I going to use personal days? Yeah, I will. But again, the rules allow me to count it. Less than 25% of time on personal activities. So let's say it's 1 week or more. Let's say it's an 8-day trip. Well, I need to spend at least 6 days on business activity, business days. I need to have 6 business days, not business activities, 6 business days. So that means days where I'm required to be on site. That means days where it's primarily business. That means days that are sandwiched between. So I need to make sure at least 75% of my time is spent on business days. And the last exception is vacation is not a major consideration. This is a very difficult one. If there's any doubt though within these three, if there's any questions, this one often comes into review, and this is where a lot of people lose the deduction. So, are you taking friends and family with you? Well, guess what? That's not a business trip. That's vacation. So vacation clearly was a major consideration. So that means you need to have either 2 or 3 for it to be considered entirely business. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be considered primarily business, but entirely business, you'll have to have 2 or 3. It's very important that you keep logs. That way you can prove these deductions. If you're claiming business days, you need to have logs of what you did and why you did it, where you did it, all of that, from when you did it to when you did it. Don't just sit there and say, oh yeah, I spent the entire time on business. If you don't have logs, you will lose. And they're going to say that it was more than 25% on personal activities. Okay, so these are the exceptions that determine entirely for business. So we have trips that are entirely for business. They meet one of those 4 tests. Trips that are primarily for business. They don't meet the 4 tests, but they're still more than 50% business days. Anything else is primarily for personal, whether that's vacation or even for investment purposes. And so deductibility of your expenses is going to depend on the classification. So let's talk about that now. Let's talk about airfare expenses. Airfare expenses are pretty simple. If it's entirely for business, it's fully deductible. If it's primarily for business, it's partially deductible. If it's primarily for personal, it's non-deductible. It's very easy. Entirely for business means it meets one of those 4 exceptions. Primarily for business means it's more than 50% business days. Remember, that can include weekends, certain holidays, standby days, if you kind of plan things out correctly. That can also include business days where you spend the day doing your normal job. However, for it to be primarily for business purposes, it does mean you have to have a reason why you're taking the trip. So at least one day you have to be meeting with the client, going to a trade show, doing something that required you to travel to this country. Primarily for personal, we're just going to touch on that real quick. You may still have that purpose. Like you may be going for a conference. However, let's say I'm going to a conference that's in Italy. I go spend 2 days at the conference and I spend 2 weeks on vacation. There was a business purpose, but it is primarily for personal. And so then my airfare actually is completely non-deductible in that situation. And that's really what the key point is. If mixing vacation with business, make sure that business days are greater than personal days. Otherwise, the airfare is non-deductible. Airfare is never deductible for guests who accompany you unless they have a business purpose. Their airfare is deductible if they have a business purpose and they meet the tests. However, if they don't meet these tests or there's no real business purpose, you need to separate those out. So travel expenses. What are travel expenses? Well, we're talking about food, lodging, taxi, car rental, tips, laundry, things like that. Things that are non-airfare expenses. So these are only partially deductible, and that is the same whether your trip is primarily or entirely for business. So now, if your trip is entirely for business and you spend 100% of your days on business days, then it's fully deductible. However, the majority of us, when we go for one of these business trips, we're not going to spend the entire amount of time for business, nor should you. I'm sorry, life is for living, not for working. So if you're going to be in a foreign country, you're going to be in, Italy, France, Japan, like, go get some ramen, go get some pasta, go do some sightseeing. That's okay. Take a day or 2. Now, we still want to try and make sure we maximize our deduction, but it's, live life, right? However, those days that you're out doing those things, your travel expenses are not deductible. So what you'll do is it's going to be an allocation that you'll do. So you'll take the total business days divided by the total days. So let's say 15 business days, 17 total days. That creates an allocation percentage. You'll multiply your expenses by allocation percentage, and those are the deductible amounts. Now, that doesn't mean that's actually the amount of tax savings you're going to get. That's deductible amounts. There's still other rules, though, that you need to keep in mind. Expenses must still be ordinary and necessary. They cannot be lavish. Meals must not be lavish, and the allocable portion is only 50% deductible. So just keep that in mind when calculating these expenses. A lot of times you're going to have to allocate certain things, and even within the allocation, not everything is fully deductible. Some things are non-deductible. Entertainment is totally non-deductible. So just to review some of the definitions, and I know this is a long video, but this is an important one. We want people to understand this. Definitions: business purpose. There has to be a real reason for travel. It's not, I want to work by the pool, I want to see the ocean. That's not a business purpose. This is, I have a conference, I have a meeting with the client, I have something that needs to be done over there. Remember, investment is not a business purpose. Business days. How many days are you actually spending on business? This can include holidays. This includes standby days, if you plan it out correctly. Working days, on-site days. Entirely for business means you meet one of the 4 exceptions. Primarily for business means you're greater than 50%. Airfare can be entirely or partially deductible, depending on whether it's entirely or primarily for business. If it's not primarily for business, it is non-deductible. Even if you spend 40% of your time on business, it's non-deductible. Thank you so much for your time today. If you have any questions about the presentation, please send us an email with the details of your situation, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thanks again.